Well, this is Baruch here at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel, and let's read the blurb at the back of this book on Likutei Maharan. It says, the collected teachings of Moreno Harav Nachman is the most important collection of Torah teachings of the outstanding Hasidic luminary, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. He lived from the years 1772 to 1810. It contains all his major Torah discourses given over the last 8 years of his life, together with many shorter lessons, transcribed and edited by his close student, Reb Nosson. Rebbe Nachman himself described Likutei Maharan as a work for the great and small alike. The Breslov Research Institute, which is devoted to making Rebbe Nachman's teachings available in English, modern Hebrew, Spanish, Russian, French, and other major languages spoken by contemporary world Jewry, presents the first ever translation of Likutei Maharan into English. He says, the translation itself is clear and painstakingly faithful to the original and accompanied by facing punctuated Hebrew text, full source references, and an extensive commentary explaining the underlying ideas and broader meaning of the text. A work throwing light on the deepest concepts of the Torah, revealed and mystical. Likutei Maharan guides the contemporary spiritual seeker around the confusions and deceptions of the modern world to faith, truth, and devotion to God. So this is a little bit idea of what we're working on, and now we're going to come over here. So we're still working on Likutei Maharan, number 4, number 9. This is they've divided the chapters is the chapter 4. And they divided at least into 9 pieces, and there could be more. So Moshe, the servant of God, died there. So now we have Moshe died in the land of Moab, which is today in Jordan somewhere, I think. He died by the kiss of God. God buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beit Peor. No man knows his burial place to this day. This is the meaning of God buried him in the valley. It alludes to Ein Sof, as is written, every valley shall be elevated. So when it says in the land of Moab, this alludes to Malchus, for King David descended from Moab. Now, it's a complicated little deal with King David and his lineage. Moshe ascended into Ein Sof, into the will of wills, and we talked about that. It was a beautiful, beautiful idea, which is called in Hebrew the Rava de Ravin, the will of wills. This corresponds to the will of the Ein Sof, because the Ein Sof started something very, very small, smaller than anything that we can imagine. It was the concept of will. Somehow the concept of will developed out of nothing. Once that happened, then many other things were possible, because within that will were many other wills. He said that the last time. So he said the will of wills, the Rava de Ravin, this corresponds to the will of the Ein Sof, which is clothed in the will's forms of the letters, the aspect of Malchus. I'll go through all of that. Malchus peh, Malchus is the mouth, Malchus is the words that come out of the mouth, and the breath that comes out of the mouth, and all the differentiations that come from it. As explained, in every place that you will find his greatness, Malchus, the aspect of his will, there you find his humility, the will of the Ein Sof. So I just want to focus on this. Malchus is the aspect of God's will. In other words, the ultimate, the destination of that will is Malchus. There's a Malchus of Olam Etzia, and that's where we live, down here. But the Malchus is also a duplicate in many, many ways of non-physical worlds, which are called Yitzira, up above it, and then Bri up above that, and find the ultimate Tzilus, which means right next or very, very close to the original veiling of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So Malchus, the aspect of the will, there you will find his humility, the will of the Ein Sof. Now let's see if there's anything we could talk about. Let me go on. Now he says this is opposite Beit Peor. Now this always, we understand that Beit Peor is a religion. It's really, people talk, I think it's talked about in the Zohar, but I just can't remember exactly what's said. But the basic idea was that people would come before the idol and defecate. And that was its observance. And the Jews somehow got involved in this. And Jews get involved in all kinds of stuff. So he says, this is opposite Beit Peor. So Moshe was buried opposite Beit Peor. Now that's the one I got to look at. And so let's start here. Beit Peor. Now let's find it here. Here we go. Beit Peor. Bilam counseled the Moabites that they want to conquer the Jews, they would have to first get them to sin. Toward this end, the Moabites sent their daughters to seduce the Jewish men and ultimately induce them to serve Moab's god, which is called Peor. Now let's read a little bit more about this. He says, why is it called Peor? Peor because it opens its mouth wide. For when one blemishes Malchus by perverting, and he's really talking about here sexual sins, they said the Peor then has the power to open its mouth wide with negative letter combinations. So if you want to know what idolatry could really be about, it will be in the knowledge of certain letter combinations. But Moshe rectified this aspect of Malchus, and as a result, Peor could not open its mouth wide. This is no one knows his burial place. Even Moshe did not know, for he was negated in the Ein Sof. To me, this is very, very interesting. So let's come over here, he says, and try to pick up the notes on it, see what we could do. So he says it opens its mouth wide. The name Peor suggests an opening. Okay? According to tradition, the worship of this idol involves scatological practices, and in particular opening the anus, okay, then we understand this, to defecate in its presence. Okay, this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, etc. Elsewhere, the Talmud teaches each year at that time, when the Jews sinned with the daughters of Moab, Peor rises up to recall their sin and denounce them. Now, we're saying over here, Peor is a kind of a demon, idol, in which in front of whom you defecate because it wants to, what the meaning of this is escapes me. But when it sees Moshe's grave opposite it, it sinks back. So obviously for Moshe to be, what did this actually work out to be? Well, then we see that incest was really the sexual avarice. It was really the power that Peor was able to induce in people. Obviously, that defecating in front of it is a very, very low thing to do. That Peor was able to make negative letter combinations. Applying this to our context, Rebbe Nachman explains that Peor opens its mouth to blemish Malchus through negative letter combinations. Now this is what we would call in some other places the accusations of the other side. This can only come about as a result of sin, though, because we see in other places is that a person basically protected until there's sin involved and causes a lesion in his protection of Kedusha. So it's a little more complicated, but that's a basic idea of something. Moshe rectified Malchus. Moshe completely rectified Malchus, which corresponds to speech. Thus, Peor cannot say anything, cannot open its mouth with negative letter combinations. It sees Moshe's grave opposite and sinks back. The Be'abi al-Nachal, I don't know whether they pronounce that right, expounds on this. Adam's sin and the sins of mankind throughout the generations have called Malchus of holiness to descend into the realm of the other side. Now hear that. So the Malchus Kedusha has to be in Galus, which is where we are. King David's soul being the personification of Malchus of holiness, because he can handle all the parts. Thus became trapped within the nation of Moab. As Rebbe Nachman has explained, Malchus of the other side, Moab's idolatry, Peor, that is Peor, which is the idolatry that they like, gains control through people's sins, which is what I was trying to say, and opens its mouth wide with letter combinations from the realm of the other side, because that's what a lesion, this lesion, let's see this word used in the Zohar. It's not that kind of idea. This is like bleeding. That when we puncture ourselves, we said before that it damages our bones. So different, it's slightly different. This is really getting you, just punching on you and making a wound, and then sucking off of the wound, because the wound and the sin go together. So he says, from the realm of the other side. This was evident in the nation of Moab from its very inception, because Moab, when Lot's daughter gave birth to the son she conceived by sleeping with her father, she named him Moab, for my father. This one is me, Amma, from her father. This negative letter combination, so there you see is a negative letter combination because it refers to incest. This negative letter combination was a sign that King David's soul, the Malchus of holiness, become trapped in the realm of the other side. When after this, the Moabites attempted to overcome the Jews by exposing them to Peor, which we see has to do with the concept of incest and sexual sin, Moshe was able to protect them. His burial in the land of Moab, so it's still there, he's still there. This possibility of us being introduced into the life of Peor, relatively speaking, means an opening into the lowest possible realms of human sexual physicality. And Moshe is still standing, still buried opposite it. That is where the will of wills placed him. So completely subdued Peor that it freed Malchus of holiness and set the stage for King David's soul to eventually be extricated from there. And King David himself continued to rectify and elevate Malchus of holiness by composing holy letter combinations, which we have in the Psalms, the songs, and prayers to God that comprise the book of Psalms. This is Baruch Fleischman. We've been studying the Baal Peor here at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel.